I'm Aaron Maté, sitting in for Jimmy, here with Misha Paulin and Americans comedian Kurt Metzger. And guess what, everybody? It's World Press Freedom Day. And the cases of Evan Gershkovich and Austin Tice are heavy on my mind, President Biden said. Yes, President Biden is solemnly marking World Press Freedom Day because there are journalists, American journalists, Evan Gershkovich and Austin Tice, who are imprisoned. And of course, Biden cares so much about...
for over a month? I didn't know it was that long. Over a month?
Over a month. Well, Austin Tice for over a decade, I believe.
Wow,
yeah,
really?
Yeah, in Syria, yeah. And this was just days after you had this White House press correspondence dinner in D.C. where the White House and the press come together to celebrate how they scratch each other's backs and how the White House never faces any tough questions, and they all make fun of us in their fancy gowns, basically. And that's where Biden said that the free press is a pillar, maybe the pillar of a free society, not the enemy. And that's Jim Sciutto, CNN.
The enemy is the people who we have not attached the authoritative label free press to. We call them info dumpers.
Exactly.
And they're going away.
Like Julian Assange. And interrupting the festivities, the Biden administration claiming it cares about free speech, were people like CODEPINK, who today went before went to an event where Antony Blinken was being interviewed by David Ignatius of the Washington Post about how much the Biden administration loves press freedom. And CODEPINK reminded Blinken of some journalists whose freedom the Biden administration is not celebrating at all.
In particular, I'm curious whether you've been able to talk.
Excuse us, we can't use this day without calling for the freedom of Julian Assange. The Biden...
I got to drag her off on World Press Freedom Day.
2 hours and not one word.
Take it easy, take it easy, take it easy, guys.
Hey, guys, it's Freedom Day, come on.
Journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was murdered by the Israeli occupation forces in Palestine. One word about Julian.
We're here to celebrate freedom of expression, and we just experienced it. Let me continue, Mr. Secretary, to ask you about Evan Gershkovich and your efforts to get him free.
Well, first,
good, because I never heard of those names. I mean, I'm rooting for them to get out, assuming they're journalists, and you know, like, but I never heard the Julian Assange thing. I've heard for how long has it been now?
Well, he's been persecuted he's been forced into asylum for over a decade, and or for close to a decade, and he's been in prison in Belmarsh for 3 years.
Oh, right.
And
he was in Ecuador in the embassy.
And he was in the embassy for many years before.
Do you remember the stories they're putting out that he's riding his skateboard in the hallways and smearing his shit on
and
things?
that was all that was orchestrated by the CIA. So this is how much they care about press freedom, is that they are locking up, torturing, trying to extradite the world's most famous and accomplished journalist, Julian Assange. And here was CODEPINK having to remind Blinken of that, because people like David Ignatius of the Washington Post, they're not going to ask him about that. As we saw right there, they get taken away, and David Ignatius says, oh, well, there was some brief moment of freedom. We just had it. Anyway, back to our choreographed press event.
I mean, I normally can't stand, like, we're doing disruption, but I've never seen one that was that good or appropriate. Yeah. Where the overall bit, on Freedom Day, they're dragging them away. Like, that's like very well done. I don't know. Absolutely. It's a great punchline to it.
And the other protester from CODEPINK, so we heard Medea Benjamin bring up Julian Assange, but the other protester brought up Shireen Abu Akleh, and that's the Palestinian-American journalist for Al Jazeera who was assassinated by U.S.-backed Israeli soldiers. And of course, the U.S. has done what it can to cover that up as well. And so here is Blinken being reminded about not just Julian Assange, but also Shireen Abu Akleh. And you see their response is to drag the people off stage and to go back to the journalists who the U.S. Talks about, because that serves their own political ends, because the journalist from the Wall Street Journal is being imprisoned by Russia. So of course it's okay for me to talk about that.
Do you know anything about why he's in prison?
Well, you know, he was going to a very sensitive Russian military site and was asking people some sensitive questions. I don't think he's a spy, obviously, and I hope he's freed, but whoever sent him there, it was pretty risky at a time of war to send a journalist to a sensitive Russian military site and ask sensitive questions like that.
It was ballsy of him, I'll give him that.
It was ballsy, but I think in this environment it was stupid, and Russia took advantage of it. Now they're going to try to extract someone who can be freed in exchange for him.
Is that what they did with that basketball player where they're like, you got to trade us somebody?
Yeah, they did.
They traded that arms dealer.
Yeah. An arms dealer who actually used to work for the U.S. in Iraq. He helped deal arms for the U.S. inside Iraq. Did
Nicolas Cage play him, a version of him in that movie, The Lord of War? It's not the exact guy, but I thought it's based on him.
Yeah. So here's Medea Benjamin. Here's first Alex Rubinstein. He says, according to Washington Post chief CIA stenographer David Ignatius, freedom of expression is when three men, each twice the weight of Medea Benjamin, aggressively hoist her off stage for calling out the U.S. government prosecution of Julian Assange as they posture about press freedom. And here's Medea, LOL, really, no free speech at the Washington Post and no remorse from Blinken on World Press Freedom Day for the terrible persecution of Julian Assange. Free Assange. Here's Glenn Greenwald. The world's shittiest people gather to pompously celebrate World Press Freedom Index. The U.S. is now number 46 and are confounded that people object that they're the ones imprisoning Julian Assange.
Has there been is that like, have we moved up at all recently or have we dropped actually?
That's a good question. I don't know. Good question. The hypocrisy, and Max Blumenthal says, the hypocrisy and moral fraud of Secretary Blinken and his sellout hosts at Reporters Without Borders in 45 seconds.
Is this his World Press Freedom in Russia Day?
And so this is becoming an issue. So we just had this White House press correspondence dinner where Biden pretended to care about press freedom. And the whole crowd of journalists, self-described journalists, applauds him because none of them actually care about journalists like Julian Assange who hold the powerful to account. They all want to be the kind of journalists who go to fancy events with Biden and toast each other.
What was the award? The press club award. Would you remember what it was called?
They awarded.
It was a very prestigious.
They awarded a Washington Post journalist for covering Biden for talking about for covering stories like how his Catholic faith informs his politics. Noble reporting like that. And so, but sometimes though, when Julian Assange's name does come up, like at that protest we just saw, or at the White House has nothing to say. All they can do is lie and deflect. So the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, she was asked about Julian Assange in a rare moment where this happens, and it's very revealing.
One more press freedom question. Advocates on Twitter today have been talking a great deal about how the United States is engaged in hypocrisy by talking about how Evan Gershkovich is held in Russia on espionage charges. The United States has Espionage Act charges pending against Julian Assange. Can you respond to that criticism?
Say, what is the criticism?
Well, the criticism is that...
What is the criticism? So we claim we care about press freedom and we're complaining about Russia imprisoning a journalist on espionage charges while we are imprisoning a journalist named Julian Assange on espionage charges. We're supporting his imprisonment in Belmarsh, and she pretends to not understand why that could be seen as hypocritical.
Dude, that's probably an official policy. First, when someone brings it up, act like there couldn't be any possible comparison.
Yeah.
If somebody presses, then you go, well, he's not a journalist.
Yes.
But first you try to stonewall it where you don't even have to get to that. If it comes to that, you go, well, he's not a journalist.
The argument is that Julian Assange is a journalist who engaged in the publication of government documents. The United States is accusing him of...
He's a little bit awkward as he's asking this question because he realizes he's not supposed to ask it. These are not the kind of questions you're allowed to ask in the White House.
Will Ducey ask it? Do you think the Deuce?
I don't think the Deuce is going to be posing this one.
Really?
Crime under the Espionage Act, and that therefore the United States is losing the moral high ground when it comes to the question of whether a reporter engages in espionage as a function of his...
You always have to say that. You always have to presume that the U.S. has the moral high ground to begin with. And the question always has to be, aren't we maybe losing our moral high ground that, of course, in reality, we never had to begin with? But to be able to pose this question, you have to say stuff like that because you have to portray the U.S. as being the moral leader. And it's only these occasional mistakes that might make us lose our, exalted, more high moral ground.
So can you respond to that?
Look, I'm not going to speak to Julian Assange in that case from here.
I'm not going to answer the question, basically. I'm not going to speak to it.
Oh, that's what she did? She sucks, dude.
But watch this. She's so dishonest, and she knows she's so dishonest that she can't even look up at the reporters.
What I will say is, and you heard directly from the president, when today in his statement on this anniversary, but also during the dinner where he talked about the freedom of the press and how important it is to protect journalists because it is part of our democracy, right? It is important to have that if we want to have a democracy, right? It is.
I know. That's why I brought up that other thing. Yeah, no, I know. What do you? I like she got her haircut though. She don't look like that little Toad guy from Mario anymore. Maybe she had her hair like perfectly like Toad.
Yeah, it was
part of
better look.
Part of how we move forward, telling the facts, being able to tell the truth, and be able to reporters to do that freely. And so the president's going to continue to speak to that. The president's going to continue to work to make sure that these Americans who are again.
Nothing to do with Julian Assange.
I like how the guy gulped while he was asking. You think it'd be okay to talk? Like he really looked. He looked like Mr. Bean, kind of.
Yeah, and this is what he's nervous of: is this complete non-answer, these dumb platitudes that have nothing to do with this question.
He doesn't want to be thrown out like some common African reporter, right?
And held hostage, who are wrongfully detained, come home. And that is something that we have seen under this administration. He's been able to do more than a dozen times. And so you see this president's commitment in just this last 2 years. We put forward additional tools to do that, to deal with this matter. And so that's what I can speak to. That's what I can speak to the president's commitment on this.
Well, you really can't now, though.
Yeah, exactly. You know, when Trump press secretaries would give answers like this, complete non-responses to the question, deflecting, the press would have a field day in going after them. But on an answer like this, where the bipartisan establishment is united around persecuting Julian Assange, everyone just looks away, even though it's so obvious she can't answer this basic question about Julian Assange. All she has are these platitudes that have nothing to do with the Assange case at all.
I'm going to weigh in on comments about Julian Assange. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's it. I'm not going to weigh in on Assange. I'm going to give you platitudes, and the press corps is supposed to just nod along. That's how it is. Here's Stella Assange. Translation, we jail journalists, so what? The moral high ground is ours regardless.
I'm not going to address that, Stella. So I'm going to talk about freedom. That's what we're going to focus on.
At the State Department, too, the State Department spokesperson was asked about the U.S. view of Julian Assange, given that they claim to be in support of press freedom, but yet they are persecuting the world's most famous journalist.
Do you believe that he's a journalist or not?
Matt, I'm just not going to offer a prescriptive assessment from here. Our view on Mr. Assange, our view on Mr. Assange is that he's been charged with serious criminal conduct in the United States.
Charged with anything, you know, Evan Gershkovich has been charged with serious criminal offense in Russia, and you say that he's a journalist, and he is obviously. And I just want to know whether or not you, the State Department, regardless of any charges that he faces, believe that he is a journalist or he is something else?
Well, first I would say, Matt, that these two cases are very, very different. Of
course they're completely different, but
the United States doesn't go around arbitrarily detaining people.
What are you talking? What do you call it? They made passed the Patriot Act to do that.
Yes, and they have a thing called Guantanamo Bay, where people have been caged for 2 decades.
They're now.
Yeah.
Dude, that's crazy. Guantanamo's open.
Yeah. And yeah, the Assange case is different than the Evan Gershkovich case in that Assange has been in prison for close to a decade. He didn't go anywhere. He didn't solicit any. He didn't take any of the materials himself. He just received them and published them. And he's being persecuted for it. And there have been even attempts to kill him. The CIA is being caught plotting to assassinate Assange. So yes, it's very different than Evan Gershkovich because this case is only 1 month old, whereas Assange's case is years and years and years.
Well, if somebody would bring up, I mean, it's so funny that it's a weak story, so they don't even bring that up now. But the thing is, well, he got people killed because he just did an info dump.
Yeah, which is not true.
And most people haven't looked into it. So they're like, I don't like to think about that because, you know, we are an exceptional country and it's uncomfortable. And I know it's something with giving out secrets and spying, and it's not important. Yeah. He's not a journalist.
The people who actually endangered U.S. sources were these 2 journalists for The Guardian. One of them is Luke Harding, who wrote that book called Collusion. And Harding published a password to a file of those WikiLeaks cables that WikiLeaks had kept secret, but Harding published it.
Why did he do that?
Because he's an idiot.
Why isn't he in trouble?
That's a great question. That's a great
You
question.
had to write the book Collusion to make up for it. You're going to write a really good Trump.
The judicial oversight and checks and balances that we have in our system versus the Russian system are a little bit different. But again, I'm not here to offer a specific assessment. What I will say is that he's been charged with a serious crime, with serious criminal conduct in the
It's a little different. Here, the oligarchs tell us what to do.
United States that has seriously put in harm's way U.S. national security, and that continues to be the case.
Okay.
And by that, he means by that he's exposed state crimes. That's what he means by harming U.S. national security.
Nobody ever asked him, like, you don't think there's a guy in Russia saying this exact thing about the guy you want out?
Exactly.
Like, you know that's visible to people.
Yeah.
I'm getting no, it's not. What am I saying? Of course it's not.
We're telling jokes in Nashville, Honolulu, Los Angeles, Northampton, Massachusetts, Syracuse, Cohoes, New York, Hartford, Connecticut, Baltimore, Chicago, Rosemont, San Diego, and more. Go to jimmydore.com to get a link for all those tickets. Plus, you can watch my new special, COVID Lies Are Funny.